Hello, it's me, Beth Rigby from the Electoral Dysfunction podcast, and I wanted to let you know that we are going on tour. We're coming to London, Salford, Liverpool and Glasgow. Ruth Davidson will, of course, be there too.
We're going to have some very special guests, and we're also getting you involved, so come along, ask us any question you like. It is going to be a super fun evening.
For all the info, go to aegpresents.co.uk. We'll be podding in person. Come along. Hello and welcome to Electoral Dysfunction. It's still parliamentary recess, so you might have noticed we've treated you with a couple of Q&A episodes, but this time it's time for a bit of a catch-up. Of course, we're going to pick apart the PM's response to a week of rioting across the country, and we'll have all the latest on the Tory leadership contest. Ruth has nailed her colours to the mast, so I want to ask her all about this. I saw the article, Ruth, and I was away, so I'm very excited to talk to you about this.
So you're going to prod me with a big stick?
Before, Ruth, we introduce our special guest for today, we have some news to share. Ruth, are you going to do the honours for me?
I am. So, do you know how we told you, everybody out there, that we were going to do a mini tour where we're taking Electoral Dysfunction out? We're going to do live shows. We're doing them in Salford and Liverpool and Glasgow and London. Well, we haven't just gone and sold London out. Come on!
Sold out, babes.
Yeah.
We're as popular as Taylor Swift on a smaller scale.
I was about to say, I'm not sure that one holds up to scrutiny.
I know, that was fake news. But we have sold out London. I am so excited about it. And you can still get tickets for Salford, Liverpool and Glasgow. There's barely any left, though, honestly. There aren't that many left. I'll put it on my social media about how you can do that. That's at Beth Rigby on X. And also, and we can confirm our first two guests in Liverpool. We are getting, I'm so happy about this, the band back together because Jess Phillips is joining us in Liverpool. I mean, Ruth, you definitely look happier about that than about seeing me. I'm just going to put that out there now.
No, that's not fair. I'm very happy
beaming.
to see the two of us, two of you,
yes.
Two of ye, the three of us,
Two
all
of
together.
Well, so we got Jess is back for one night only, so I'm so happy about that.
We need cocktails.
And in Glasgow, we've got a broadcasting legend. Kirsty Walk is coming, and I'm absolutely overjoyed about that. Now, our next bit of excitement comes in the form of today's special guest. She was actually suggested to us by one of our listeners. Joan messaged me and Ruth to say, I'm relatively new to your podcast, but I'm enjoying it as well as feeling much better informed. I would love to suggest this person as a guest if you can get her. She was my MP in Bristol and I was devastated to see her lose out this time. She's a great loss to the new government. Welcome, Thangam Debbonaire.
Oh, thank you for having me. I've been trying not to giggle for the last 5 minutes.
I know she has.
I'm right here. I'm very excited.
Good. Also, can I just say, someone wrote
That's
in.
really sweet.
That
Thank
you are
Joan.
loved.
Thank you,
Joan wrote in.
I know. Thank you, Joan.
That doesn't
really,
happen
really
for all
means a lot.
MPs.
It does not. No. I had a lot of love from my constituents.
She didn't think we could get you. She was like, if you could get her.
Well, Joan, let's go out for pies at Prime Minister. Other pies are available next time I'm in Bristol. Joan, I love you. You're a legend.
Now, Thangam, you were an MP in Bristol for nearly a decade.
Mm-hmm.
You've done a fair few shadow cabinet roles. How is it adjusting to life outside the Commons? Because I have to say, you look pretty happy.
Well, I've just got back from India. I mean, this time yesterday I was on a plane. And I spent 2 weeks, I kind of had a realisation sort of 2 weeks after the election that I needed to just book a flight and go to my favourite place. And I just got on my phone and booked a flight to Chennai and then booked a car and my favourite hotel room in my favourite place. And I'm not going to name it because I don't want anyone else to have it. In Pondicherry, which is a beautiful place. It's chilled, it's happy, it's beautiful. I ate nice food, I read books, I thought about what had happened and I started making a lot of plans because Joan, it's lovely of her to say I'm in demand because one of the really weird things that happens after you lose a seat in the circumstances in which I did, which was Hardly anybody in the Labour Party did. So I've had some really lovely offers of new things to go on to, and that definitely helps the transition. But a transition it definitely is, because politics, as you guys know, it is a drug, and sometimes it's a great healthy drug and sometimes it's probably not. And the last 2 weeks have really helped me sort of slow down a bit, think about things. But, I'm back in London today and really excited to be getting going. And this is just the perfect way for me. So perfect. I'm so excited to be here.
You do seem well. And I think it was really rough, particularly rough for you, I think, because you were going into cabinet.
In shadow cabinet, going into what would have been my dream job. But, other dream jobs are out there, and it's kind of exciting to turn the page and not necessarily know where the page is going to lead you in this chapter. I'm 58. I feel I've got my best years ahead of me, actually. I feel really hopeful, partly because I've got a Labour government that I wanted and I campaigned hard for, and I'm really proud of, and I'm so proud of Keir. And partly because I've given myself permission to go, not everything's going to work out, but other things will come along if you put yourself out there. And in the 2 or 3 weeks that followed the general election, because I know this is going to sound weird, but I did kind of know what was probably going to come. So I'd prepared my staff, who were my first priority, and I made sure that they'd got their CVs ready, that they got out emails to the new MPs the next morning, the 5th of July, that I got on the blower to new colleagues and said, look, this person and this person, this person in my office are just brilliant. And I'm really proud of them because they were upset, but they also realised that they were going to get new opportunities. And once I knew that they were going to be fine, it was quite interesting, actually, just to send messages to people who I've enjoyed working with in that role and say, could we just have coffee? Could we just meet without any expectation? And discover that through talking to people, there are opportunities for a former politician who, I know it's going to sound weird because I lost, but I had a lot of love from my constituents. And I had people who genuinely said, we want to keep you and we want a Green MP, and we're really torn. And I totally get that. Did occasionally have to say that's not quite how democracy works. But I had a horrible time as well, but nothing compared to, I think, what Jess Phillips had to go through, Shabana, Rushanara, John Ashworth. Some of the things that happened to me, I'm trying not to think about them too much because I also had a lot of lovely things. And my campaign was probably the most fun campaign I've ever run, even though I kind of knew all along how it was going to end. It is difficult to lose, but it's a learning experience.
Thangam, can I ask you one more thing?
Of course.
Would you stand again, or if you were offered a peerage, would you go to the Lords?
So my team, bless them, I think because we've got a lot of love in my team, have said never say no to this. But I've got to tell you right now, it's not where I'm looking, because I feel very strongly about moving forward and looking forward to the next set of opportunities. I only ever wanted to stand in my own seat. And Carla Denyer, leader of the Green Party, she's the new MP there. She's going to bed in. She's going to do a good job. I think she will win the next one. That takes me to 68. Am I really going to hang around till I'm 68 or wait for someone to die in a by-election cause? I just don't. That's not madly me.
40,
yeah,
I mean,
seriously. But I want to be doing my best life at 68, and I'm not totally sure that going back to the Commons is the way.
Are you saying that you're 58 years old?
Yeah, I was 58 while I was in
Doesn't
India.
look it, does
about
she?
Got a good
40.
hairdresser.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, I think that, Thangam, I think your next job could be bottling up your positivity and selling it, because I'd definitely buy some of that.
Also, can I ask you one other question, just because Beth's reapplying her lipstick, so I've got a moment.
Very important. Very important business.
Thangam Debbonaire is a brilliant name, but Wikipedia says you changed it, but I know from my own file that Wikipedia is often very, very wrong, so can I just check that?
Well, Thangam Debbonaire is my legal name and has been for a long time.
Right, okay.
The reason why I got to Debbonaire is kind of a 3 glasses of wine story, but it is my name. And I was born with the name Singh, which means male Sikh, and seeing as I'm neither male nor a Sikh, it became a bit of a problem. And when my dad died, I decided it was time to change. And it is the name of my family from my first, we call it a marriage, but we weren't married, but that first relationship. And so I'm Debbonaires along with all my nephews and nieces and my lovely sister-in-law.
It's all right. Beth and I both talk about being married, and neither of us are actually married, so
that's another story as well. But we need to actually get onto the actual
doing the news, aren't we?
Yeah,
well, apparently,
apparently
we're
I've written
I'm going to
notes.
cover
I've
some
done my
politics.
Right, okay, so it's the first time that we have had a chance to properly chat since the riots we saw across the country a couple of weeks ago, because we recorded the last couple of electoral dysfunction pods before we went off on holiday. Now, it all started with misinformation online about the killer, of those 3 girls in Southport. What an awful, awful story that was. And it fed into the far right and anti-immigration ideas and narratives. I was struck by some of the messages we've had about this, including from one of our listeners who got in touch to say that as a mixed-race woman, it was the first time she's ever been scared in her home. Thangam, I want to come to you first. What did you make of what we were seeing?
I was distraught. I'm a mixed race woman, and it felt like Sadiq Khan wrote something recently about how it was a throwback to the 70s. It felt like a different time had come back. And I wanted people to name these riots as race riots. They weren't anti-immigration riots. They were racist riots by racists. There are people who have concerns about immigration who wanted nothing to do with the rioting. There are valid questions and debates to have about immigration, migration, and I would say a whole range of things, including the effect of Brexit or what we do when we go shopping for cheap health workers from other countries. There's a whole load of stuff we could be discussing. These were race riots. And as far as I'm concerned, the impact on those of us of colour has been horrendous. It makes you scared. And across the country, to know that there are people, it's a minority. That is not the country I know and love, by the way. I am a real patriot. And I believe that in Britain, in the mid-21st century, if you are racist, if you hate me because of the colour of your skin, it's you that's going to have to get over it. Your problem, not mine. But when you use violence on the streets and you're visibly doing it and you are chucking fire at a hotel because there are people, it wasn't because they had Americans in or Canadians, it was brown people who've come here because they're fleeing something, whatever that something is. And that is how pogroms start. And that was frightening for people of colour. Who we are as a nation is not that. It's just not. And I genuinely, my heartfelt plea for everyone is to remember that in this country, if you hate because of the colour of someone's skin, it's your problem. You have to get over it. We can debate immigration if you want, but that's a separate thing. These were race riots. They were scary. I was about to do my first swear on your podcast, but not ready to do that yet.
Ruth,
Yeah.
I mean, I was away, so I was watching this and reading it from abroad, and I found it really shocking, and it surprised me.
It went up really fast. Like there was a spark, but it actually felt over the summer. Like it almost kind of felt like it was coming, I thought.
Why did you feel it was coming?
I mean, we saw this before, kind of hot summer. People have felt as if their life's not getting better, if they felt like they're being hard done to. Some of these things, I personally think, can be a long time in the making before there's that tinder spark that sets them off. And actually, in a sense, this had almost nothing to do with Southport because the riots proper didn't start elsewhere till after we already knew that that was fake news. So people who were rioting in some of the other cities across the country knew damn fine by the time that they started sort of stealing Crocs and Greggs and all the rest of it that actually this has nothing to do with migrants or immigrants or anybody else. And what happened in Southport is an absolute tragedy. And in a sense, part of the offence that I felt was for the families of those wee lassies, for those little girls. Like, how on earth can you take that devastation? Like, nobody should bury their own child. They should never go to a dance class and not come home. And then suddenly, whipped up by Tommy Robinson and his gang of absolute arseholes, you're suddenly seeing England burn. And that is not the memory that any of those families want to have seen come from this. I was disgusted, actually. I was really disgusted.
For me, one of the things that was troubling was the label. I understand why it was chosen to call them mindless thugs, but I don't think it's helpful because it wasn't mindless. People make choices. I used to work with violent men, and one of the first things we used to do was to try and get them to understand that they couldn't ever just say, oh, something snapped, I just blew up. You made a conscious decision to pick up a brick. That depressed me, that people were being allowed to be called mindless thugs. Because for me, I'm afraid to say, and I say this with respect to my colleagues who are using that language, I get why they are, but it lets them off the hook.
That was the language the PM used.
And I disagree with it. I understand why he used it. And I think, I think taking a law and order approach was right. I think he's absolutely right. But I think two things can be true at the same time. Take a law and order approach, but also name racism as racism, because otherwise we're treating a whole bundle of people who are not racist, but who do want to discuss migration in the same boat, and that's not okay. Motives do matter, and they matter under law as well, because it's an aggravating factor if hate is part of it. And I think we should at least be considering the motives behind those people who chose to go out and do those things.
I think Keir Starmer did some things right, and I think he did some things wrong. I thought his initial speech was slightly ill-judged. His job should have been to try and douse it as soon as it started, and actually telling everybody that was out having a riot that we're just going to write you off, almost that you're too stupid and imbecilic to really know what you're doing. I mean, that's only ever going to inflame people. But what I think he did do was, it seemed very clear for me as this went on, and it became clear that there was almost a sense that there was a want from the people that were sort of behind as much of this as it was organised to try and get Keir Starmer to get the army out, to try and make this look as, this is how a new lefty government oppresses people just that are saying that their country is being taken away from them. They wanted those pictures, and I thought he was really right to do this with the civil policing and not be tempted into that, because it could have been tempting. And what's been great is the swift justice, because the immediate the shock that some people had that there were consequences to their actions. And I think there's a lesson in there about how the fact that the courts are so backed up means that in almost everywhere else, you're not seeing immediate consequences to stuff that goes wrong in your community. And that allows people to think that they can do anything. Actually getting swift justice everywhere means that you get a more ordered society all over the place.
For most of us, our parents, my dad, first generation immigrant, he was incredibly patriotic. He was proud to be here. He went to considerable lengths to do what's called integrate. And it was always very painful to him, and he would never talk about the painfulness of when he realised that no matter how hard he tried for a small number of people, he would never be British, just because he was very, very dark. He was from South India, and you're very dark. And I think there's a sort of lack of understanding of how patriotic first generation, and also those of us who are second and third generation, how proud we are to be in a country that actually does like the fact that we're diverse.
Going back to Starmer then and the way he handled it, you think that he should have called it for what it was, which was racism? Did you feel that that wasn't done in a way it should have been?
I was in India when it was happening, but I was still scared. I was so relieved to be in India and amongst brown people. And I was texting a lot of friends, and the pain and fear of just seeing a group of angry white men very obviously targeting brown people because they are brown. It is visceral what that does to you. It's also visceral how it makes you feel when white allies of yours, you feel, haven't quite got it yet. But I have a lot of respect for Keir, because I think if you aren't brown, it is hard to just understand like how tough that is to watch. And brown people, just as women have to, we learn to put on a coat for dealing with everyday sexism and patriarchy. It doesn't mean it's not there. And it's similar with race. Like, I can't get up in the morning and cry because there are racists. But seeing that was scary. And yes, I wanted him to say it earlier. I really did. And I also get that it's difficult when you're a politician. I mean, for goodness sake, I know we're probably going to talk about his lack of holiday. The man's not had a break. He's running a country. He's got big, important stuff to do. He's a man of law and order, and I believe in law and order. So it's a complicated set of feelings, but there was an emotional response which I had, which I don't think is invalid. I wanted my Prime Minister to recognise what it was doing for us brown people who are patriots and who believe in law and order and believe in this country. I'm glad that more voices have come into this. I'm also glad that we're now looking forward, because I think there's a big and important debate to have about who we are as a country, which Keir is amply well qualified to be the leader in, because he is the leader, he's the Prime Minister. We need to be looking forward at what sort of a country we want, and it's got to involve diverse voices, because we're all here, because we're part of this country and we love this country, and this country's got a great future. I really believe that.
I mean, I had a conversation with some of the team around Starmer about how they handled it. He went back to the 2011 playbook about when there were the London riots. He was Director of Public Prosecutions. He took the view that swift justice would be a deterrent, and so knocked heads together in terms of getting the different bodies together in order to make sure that that sentencing came within a week, and there were photos and images and news stories of people being imprisoned in order to stop the riots. But as I explained that to you, Thangam, you look disappointed.
I'm disappointed that, first of all, that was 13 years ago. The world's a different place. Second of all, in this year of 2024, being able to say proudly we are a multiracial country. And being able to say, not in a caveated way, if you feel that you were targeted because of your race, then I understand. No, I felt targeted even though I was not personally targeted, because brown people were being targeted, and that matters. Now, I'm still proud of Keir taking a law and order approach, and I want to be really, absolute about this, but I think 2 or 3 things can be true at the same time. I think Keir is ideally placed to take us forward, to lead this country and be proud of our diversity, and that has to include recognising that racism is still around, and you only need a small number of racists to make a lot of brown people very afraid. And we need to hear from our leaders, and I mean not just Keir, but council leaders, who I think a lot of whom have been saying that. Sadiq, for instance, I loved what he said. I think it's really important to own the fact that this has an impact on us, but also we refuse to be afraid. I refuse to be afraid of being on my own streets in this country. They're my streets too.
So what would you like him to do now? What would you like to see from the government?
I think we've got a really important job to do here, which isn't just have the debate about migration. And that is important, by the way. And we need to be not afraid of voices to the left as well as to the right about migration. It's a complicated subject. It touches a lot of people's emotions. But for a lot of us, it is existential to talk about it in a constructive way as to what we bring to this country, what we've brought to this country. The reason why some of us are here is because we were invited to be here. My dad is different. He had a music scholarship and he came to the Royal Academy of Music, but his parents sacrificed everything for him to be British, and he was always proud of it. A lot of other people of my colour from different parts of the world came because they were invited here to run the buses, to work in the health service. And the same people who will enjoy a curry on a Saturday night, incidentally, quite often a curry that we Indian people would never eat, but anyway, well, some of them will also want to dress up in a St George's flag and think it's patriotic to chuck bricks at the police. Now, I think it's important that the Labour government does what I know it wants to do. I've heard Keir talk about this, which is tell a news story. And that telling a news story can involve people of colour as well as white working class people, but working class people include brown people. I think it would be fantastic if it included, say, Rishi Sunak, who, for me, that was an emotional occasion for me the day Rishi walked into Number 10. I did cry, because I never thought in my lifetime I would see someone that is of the same colour skin as me and their family walk in. So I think there's a really important job to do there. But I also think embedding equality, diversity and inclusion into every single bit of policy making, and not doing it as an add-on, but doing it because we are all better off when everybody's talents are included, when they're allowed to grow and prosper. We're better off as a country when brown people aren't afraid. We're better off as a country when women feel able to take part in public life without abuse. We're better off as a country when working class kids, white and brown, feel able to take up a career that means they can contribute to this country. Getting that across, I think, could be a really special moment and a really special process.
One of the things I always bang on about is the absolute absence of leadership that there was post-Brexit to tell Britain's national story. We've not had a national story about who we are in the world, and other people, our allies, were looking for that. People that perhaps didn't vote for Brexit but were willing to give it a chance because they understood that the country had its say, were looking from that from our leaders, and it just wasn't there. And when you talked about the London riots, there was commentary at the time that this could be a regular occurrence, particularly under a Tory government, and because it was a coalition and it wasn't stable and blah, blah, blah. And then actually, if you remember, the next summer, we had the London Olympics. And who were the big heroes of that London Olympics? They were Jessica Ennis, a mixed-race woman, and Mo Farah, a black immigrant man. And they were beloved, and that was also Britain. The opening ceremony of that told our national story in a way that possibly most of us wouldn't have been able to articulate. And God love Danny Boyle for doing it, because we all expected it was going to be naff. And actually we ended up thinking, actually, do you know, that's pretty good. And I'm proud of being in the UK. And I think part of all of this is because people do feel that there isn't a national story out there. We don't feel proud particularly to be part of the UK right now. There are many people that feel that their life is very hard. It's been hard for a very long time. They don't see the hope that they can see. And there is a big job of work there for Keir Starmer to do. And I don't particularly think Keir Starmer is the most natural communicator, but I do understand that he is thoughtful and he is diligent and he will do the best that he can to craft that story, because he can see that there is a genuine need for that, and the absence of it has consequences. And we saw some of the consequences, I think, this summer.
One of the things that I was really relishing as Shadow Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport is how that role, and what I see is actually a role for all of my former colleagues and still friends, is it can be such a great part of telling a news story. There are artistic organisations, sporting organisations, heritage and tourism. It's everything about telling our story. I think Lisa's fantastic, and I'm sure she's going to do it absolutely brilliantly. She'll bring new things to it, and I'm so proud of her, and I'm cheering her on. But that role is critical, and I really hope that Keir, because he's a smart guy, that he recognises the diversity of talent in his front bench and back benches who can help him to craft that story.
It's so interesting the way that this conversation has developed for me, because I've looked at this basically through some of the briefings I've had and conversations I've had within government from a purely law and order point of view, because that's how they are looking at it, right? So when I say to those in government, well, what are you going to do next, or how are you going to contain this, deal with it? A lot of the conversation is around, well, we need to make sure that people understand online, and you cannot just say what you want to say. And, you know, they're going to look at social media companies' policy. They're going to look at the Online Harms Act and whether retrospectively that needs adjusting. They're going to do the work around that.
All of which is good, but one thing I bring with me from my work with very violent men was just telling them it was against the law wasn't enough. We had that as a sort of threat. That was the stick effect. But the carrot has got to be, and it's unpalatable to people to hear that there has to be a carrot too. A carrot for us as a country is we're at a position where we can tell a great news story together. And that was what I used to do with violent men. I used to help them re-script their lives. Now, one of the things that Jess Phillips and I used to have different perspectives on, because she was a great icon of the domestic violence movement from working with women, I got a lot of the satisfaction from my job working with violent men, because I felt that was good frontline feminism as well. And it was always hard for someone like Jess, who had to hear the women's stories, to have to hear from someone like me. I can't just shame the men who are brutal. I can't just lock them up, because one day they're going to come out of prison or they're going to want to see their kids. We have to help them to tell a new story for who they are. Very often it was very, very hard for them, and it wasn't always possible. And certainly some of the racists that we've seen chucking bricks and chucking fire, they're not going to change. But a huge chunk of people want to hear a new story. And I honestly think it's there for the government's taking, and I urge them to do that and come back from summer. I hope Keir gets a bit of a break, because everyone needs a bit of a break to think and to reflect. And I want to see them do that, and I think they can.
So if I was advising the Labour government, and of course I'm on the other side and I wouldn't, but I would reframe the way I thought about it so it wasn't carrot and stick. So I would do the whole criminal justice thing, the opening the courts 24 hours, getting people through, doing the perp walk, showing all of that. I would consider that to be the surgery. So that is what you have done in order to staunch the wound and get things sewn up. I would then think about the next 6 months as that's your rehab, that's you going to physio.
Yeah, no,
how do you make the muscles work positively again? In my head, that's how you need to frame it and think about it and start talking about all of the good things that are in communities.
But one of the other interesting parts about this, though, has been how the organisation sprung up on social media, the disinformation, and the big players on social media.
The Tommy Robinsons.
Yeah, and then like Elon Musk weighing into the discussions around law and order in our country. How difficult, Ruth, do you think that this is for Starmer? When I ask people around him about whether he's even engaged with it, they just say it's just water off a duck's back. It doesn't bother him at all.
I think that's wrong, because I think one of the things that he will learn, particularly when he gets into trouble with something or other, as all prime ministers do, we know that one of the techniques that you do is you go abroad to send a message that you want to have listened to back home, and it weirdly gets amplified because it's a message that's being made abroad. And I think that there needs to be actually some quite strong engagement between Keir's team, not at Keir's level, but within Keir's team, to talk to and to brief people like the New York Times that have previously written things like you can't walk down a street in London without being fear of being stabbed, and it's now majority black gangs and all this sort of stuff, which is simply not true. And some of the things that Elon Musk have been saying, which has been wild about how safe or unsafe the United Kingdom is as a country, what police are charged with doing or not doing. And it has been wildly inaccurate. And weirdly, because it comes from somebody outside of the UK saying that, it almost carries more weight rather than less, particularly when it gets shared. So I think there needs to be a huge amount of engagement and possibly a conversation about the role of some of these platform owners and what is publishing, What is regulation? Yes, I know there's the online harms bill, which seems already miles out of date and it's not even been brought in yet. And legislation will go some way, but there's also going to have to be an awful lot of soft engagement and rules set down for operation in this country.
I think the hashtag two-tier policing, which I really don't want to use, and one of the reasons I don't want to use it is we have a police officer in my family and I'm proud of him. When you use that phrase, you're insulting the police. And there are difficulties with the police. We've had all sorts of things over the last few years and all sorts of criticisms, but it's still, that's who you call. You don't call Ghostbusters, you call the police when something goes wrong. And police do a difficult job because they actually put themselves at risk every single day. They go to work every day and don't know if they're coming home. But the police officer,
Yes.
Keir Starmer, and this does make me feel emotional actually. I used to, when I came out the Commons every night, I always used to go and say goodnight to him because I felt so strongly like his family said goodbye to him in the morning and they never saw him again.
There's a little plaque just outside the gate at Parliament for Keith. He was a police officer who was stabbed, murdered in the courtyard at the House of Commons in a terrorist attack, and he stopped the assailant and he lost his life. And I have to say, as a Roman Catholic, I'd make the sign of the cross every time I walk
It gets me
past
every
it.
time.
Yeah.
And it gets me right now thinking about it.
Yeah.
And to come back to this debate, it matters because saying two-tier policing is disrespectful to the police. And if you are a patriot, you can start with the police do an incredible job and they put their lives on the line. And Keir Starmer exemplifies this to me. I must have met him, but I never knew him. And he died so that we could have a democracy. And that means something big. And anyone who's truly patriotic wouldn't be using that as a hashtag. And the fact that Elon Musk is he put it out there. Like, who the hell does he think he is? And I think we've got now onto policing, which I don't think was even on our list, but I think it really matters because we started out talking about riots and we've got the Tory leadership contest going on. We're talking about how we tell a new story for the country. And I'm tribal, and Ruth, I'm sure you're tribal too. And I'm Labour through and through, but I also believe in pluralism. And I think it is to our benefit if we are able to unite. I mean, I would like to hear from the Tory party leadership contest. Like, what are those leadership contestants? Contestants is the wrong word, isn't it? What are the candidates? Sorry.
Number one.
I'm still finding it hard to get used to the idea that the leader of the opposition isn't Keir Starmer. And when you said government a minute ago, I genuinely still had like the Tory government in my head. So I think this debate about that, there's some debates which are getting too black and white. Like, are we pro law and order or against law and order? Of course we're in favour of law and order, right? Everybody basically is. Do we want migration or do we not want migration? That's kind of missing the point about who we are as a country. Do we want riots? Almost nobody wants riots. But we also need to understand a bit more about why riots happen and what we do to get past that. And I think that is a debate which I'd like to see the Tory leadership contestants get in on as well, because they have a crucial role as the opposition. No matter how small in number they may be, they are constitutionally required to oppose constructively. And I want to hear those things.
Well, you have led me neatly on to our next subject. After the break, the Tory leadership contest.
Yeah, it's a contest.
Let's get to the contestants. Okay, so one of the stories that's been rolling on in UK politics is the Conservative Party's search for a new leader. This is a long, drawn-out process. The winner will determine whether the party moves closer to the right to please reform voters, whether it tries to win over more of the centre. The 22 committee, the backbench committee of the Conservative Party have put the rules in place, and it's effectively a very, very long race now. I think the leader is going to be announced in early November, right? So this is only just getting going. And there are currently 6 candidates in the run-in: James Cleverly, Priti Patel, Rob Jenrick, Kemi Badenoch, Mel Stride, Tom Tugendhat. Ruth.
Yeah.
Can you bring us up to speed on how it works?
Yeah, so the way it works is you've got to have a certain number of people that nominate you and sign your paper and that are MPs to show that you've got enough support in order to enter the race. There are then rounds of voting, again, amongst MPs, because whoever is leading the party has to be able to lead the party within the Commons. And then you'll get down to a final 2. The final 2 will be taken to the membership, and we have a 1 member, 1 vote, and you get across the line that way.
And Ruth, you have committed news, not on our podcast.
I
I'm
know.
going to get over it eventually.
I know, I cheated on you with...
You did.
Well, actually, with social media.
I leave the country for
you do
2
it?
weeks, and you're
So
you're
you
like
abandoned me,
dalliancing with
and I
someone else.
I valiantly carried on because you had abandoned me to sun yourself by the side of a pool and have tzatziki and Mykonos beer or whatever it was.
Oh, I had such a nice time. Mythos beer. So you, Ruth
Yes.
Davidson, committed
Yes,
news
I
while we
did.
were away because you have become one of the rare Conservatives who have nailed your colours to a mast. Now, each candidate had to have 10 nominations or 10 backers to be put forward. So that's 60 MPs that have backed someone. Hardly anyone is really saying publicly who they're backing, and a load of MPs are not committing. Now, someone was telling me that part of the fact that this has become quite a long, drawn-out process means a number of MPs are just biding their time. At the moment, Rob Jenrick is the front runner. He has got 9 or 10 MPs have publicly come out for Rob Jenrick, which is the highest number who've been publicly declared for anyone, closely followed by Ruth's pick. Ruth is backing. I need a drum roll. James Cleverly.
I am.
Ruth, tell.
Ruth,
Say
come on,
why.
let's have it. Why are you backing James?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, first of all, and this is going to sound dreadfully like an actual politician, and I always try and sound the least like a politician that I can, I do actually kind of respect everyone that's throwing their hat in the ring because they can see the size of the job to rebuild from the position we're in because, I mean, that was a horsing of an election. That was, that wasn't just a spanking, that was an absolute annihilation. So the trying to rebuild is going to be really important, and I think the people that are taking this on very likely know that they will never be Prime Minister. Their job will be to be the leader of the opposition and to get us to a point where the next person, or even the person after that, will be the person that will take us back into government. So, it really is a roll up your sleeves job. That being said, there's a bit of a spectrum in there in terms of who's standing. My politics are probably closest to Tom Tugendhat, although James he's got quite a lot of bread, which is why I'm sort of backing him. For me, the most important thing is somebody who understands what leadership in opposition is. It's a really different job from being in government. You don't have to have an opinion on every single policy. You can pick and choose your battles. You've got to, work with rebuilding a machine when you've got a sliver of the resources you had just 6 months ago, because in opposition nobody wants to back you, and you've got fewer people and fewer funds and all the rest of it. You've got to try and reach out to the people that have turned their back on you, and they've often turned their back on you for good reason, and we struggled to give anyone a reason to vote for us in that election. That defeat was years in the making, and was well deserved in my opinion. And you've got to try and unite a fractured and bruised and battered a group of people and try and lead them. And I think James is best placed to do that because he's not from one particular tribe or another. He's worked under 4 prime ministers. He will work with dripping wets like me, but also right-wingers. And I was a staunch Remainer. He's a Brexiteer. He's done some pretty big jobs. So as well as being Foreign Secretary and Home Secretary and sort of rallying the world to help Ukraine, he's also been the party chairman, so he knows how to listen to members and how to involve them and how to G them up, and that's quite important. We cannot, as a party, just chase the 3.8 million votes that went to Reform. There were, okay, Reform got 5 seats off of us, like, well done them, but we lost 60 seats to the Lib Dems, we lost over 150 seats to the Labour Party. We have to talk to the whole country, and we have to have a figure that is big enough and has enough authority to talk to all of these things. And also, I know he's a good guy, and that matters. The character of somebody in leadership matters.
So I need to know this just because I just love this sort of detail. Like, how did it happen? Did he phone you up and say, Ruth, will you back me, or did you just decide and then you phoned him? Or, like, how did this coupling happen?
I mean,
I want to know.
Okay, let's be seriously
Give me
clear.
all
I have never coupled with
There's
James
no coupling.
Cleverly. There is no bad coupling.
Well, that was probably a bad word to use, but
Well, I think a lot of people in the party have been chatting about things, and I chatted with some people that were very involved in Cameron government, actually, and talking about how I probably would come out for James. I obviously wanted to see the field and all the rest of it, and I think that probably got back to him. And one of the people that are helping run the team also worked on Saj's campaign, and I backed Saj when he was running for leadership, and got in touch and said, look, James is wanting, he's coming up to Scotland, would you have a conversation with him? So I ended up speaking to him at the in the departure gate at Edinburgh Airport on the phone, and he was talking about what he was looking to do and how he was trying to conduct himself and what he thought was important. And we were coming to the end of the conversation. I was like, James, you haven't actually asked me to back you yet. And he's like, oh, yeah. And he was a bit nervous. I was like, no. See, when you're doing these calls with lots of people, you literally have to ask them to say yes to you, because they'll be having all of these conversations with lots of people, and it's quite important you nail them down. Like, having run a leadership election in a much smaller place, further away, like, you really have to nail folk down, because actually lots of the people you'll be speaking to will be friends with all of them, or at least a grand proportion of the people that are running, and they'll be having all of these conversations. So, like, I gave him a bit of a spanking, as is my wont. I gave him a scold, and then said, when are you coming up to Edinburgh? We had a chat, we did a little video, there was a members event, I introduced him, so helping out in any way that I can, because I think he would be a good leader of the opposition.
The reason I was very interested in this, well, I'm interested in everything about you, Ruth, as you know, but is because I saw the piece, because you wrote an op-ed, didn't you, in the Sunday Times, and it interested me because you mentioned him yourself, Tom Tugendhat. Now, Tom Tugendhat has been, in the last leadership race, he was the candidate for the One Nation group of Tories, which you would be part of.
Yeah.
But you didn't pick Tom, you picked James. And that interested me. Someone said to me that a black mark against Tom with some of the One Nationers has been because he backed Liz Truss in the last leadership race. And that had gone down badly with some of your colleagues.
I'm not gonna slag off Tom. Like, he's a friend, and I like him.
But why didn't you pick him?
What we need is somebody that speaks to the whole party. We're a rump now. We're not big enough to have just one wing of it. And I think actually James is able to bring people from different wings of the party together. And I think that there would be perhaps a backlash against somebody who's either very far in one direction or very far in the other.
So do you think maybe Tom should drop out for the sake of his own future?
I don't think he will. I think, again, as an ex-military man, I think he will absolutely see this project through, and he has a following and he has a support, and it may well be that he captures enough of that side of the party to make it into the final two. I personally am unsure whether he will be able, whether there isn't a ceiling to his support, but he's one of the ones I think more likely to surprise people by having a good campaign, because he's not as well known and he's a very good communicator. And I think that there is a bit of an existential threat facing the Tories about whether there's, been talk about an amalgamation with Reform or some people splitting off and going to join them. I mean, there was, as you know, even while you're away, there was, huge interest that Suella Braverman, when she realised she wouldn't get the support to run herself, she might go off and become Reform's 6th MP. That's come to nothing. It might just have been, a summer rumour, because lots of things happen in the silly season when the Parliament's not sitting. I think James speaks to lots of different parts of the party and can pull us together in a way that somebody that's very far to one end or the other wouldn't be able to do.
I get that. And I'm not asking you to sort of say anything against Tom at all, but did it kind of create ruffles that he backed Liz Truss?
I'm not really sure. I mean, I think the part of our system is supposed to be that the MPs are the kind of safety net that makes sure that we, in our say, we don't have a Corbyn kind of moment where somebody comes through.
We did have Liz Truss.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And there is a lot of anger within the Tory party that Liz Truss was put in the final two. Now, part of the reason that a number of my colleagues who backed her, who I would, and I was very angry with them, Tom isn't the one I'm particularly thinking of, but a very good friend of mine who is so far from Liz Truss's politics, who knew her in her ministerial roles, who I had private conversations about her abilities, her ability to listen, lots of things, said that the membership would never forgive them if she didn't make it into the final two, because of the polls that had been out saying that she was the most popular. And what it came to pass is when you actually saw the result between Rishi and Liz, it was incredibly close, and actually the polling shaped the race in a way that that wasn't borne out by the actual votes. And I think I would say to all of my parliamentary colleagues, Lords aren't part of this process, it's only MPs, be really careful that push polling from individual candidates about what the membership thinks, don't let that blind you. Your job is to be the filter, it's to be the sieve to get the final two in there. So that's the only thing that I will say.
Obviously, from my point of view, Ruth, as I'm tribal, if your party wants to elect someone completely unelectable, go right ahead. But speaking as just a civilian here now for the moment, I love your advice to your colleagues, because you don't want to elect someone as leader who you think is who the members want. It's not about the members, it's about the country. I really hope you don't choose someone that the country wants, because I want Keir to be Prime Minister for a very long time.
Of that list, who would Keir most like to become the Conservative Party leader and least, i.e. who's the one you would fear the most and who's the one that you would feel is unelectable?
I can't speak for Keir, obviously, but I think as a general rule, any Prime Minister wants the leader of the opposition to be someone who allows them to look like the statesperson in the room. I mean, Keir is a grown-up.
So of that list,
I'm not going to name this. I mean,
right,
James Cleverly, you show me the list.
Not Keir, but from a Thangam point of view. Right, there's your list. Who would you most, from a Labour point of view, who would you most like to be leader and least like to be leader?
I'd most like Kemi Bader not to be leader.
Okay.
I think Tom, Mel, James and Pretty, actually, I think could provide something. I think that the way that Ruth's expressed that needing to reach out to the country, and I think, James comes across as a grown-up. I had a lot of time for Priti Patel personally. We got on very well behind the scenes. I disagree with almost everything she says, but I think she's actually got a lot to offer the country. I would personally like Kemi Bader not to win.
So you think Kemi would be the worst choice for them?
I personally, I do, but I think Tory MPs know better than I do, and Ruth probably knows better than I do.
And you think James could cause a bit of trouble for Starmer?
I think that there's quite a few people on that list who will know exactly what Ruth has said, that your job is principally, you're not going to be Prime Minister, you've got to rebuild the Tory party.
It's really interesting, this, Ruth. What's been interesting about the Kemi Badenoch campaign was that she was in a way the front runner at the outset, but because it's a long drawn out contest, they were sort of had a shock and awe strategy, which was like, just make her the front runner, stitch it up. She's going to poll. All the polling's going to show Kemi's most popular with members, and it's not quite playing out like that for her, right? And MPs haven't kind of publicly declared for Kemi.
I think there is a sense that in terms of purity of the tribe, so wanting somebody that can touch a lot of the sort of the feels of members about sound money and particular views on critical race theory and all the rest of it, that Kemi ticks a lot of those boxes. But I also think that a lot of our members are shell-shocked, and they understand that they want somebody who can start the process of the Tories winning again. Because one of the things that Tories have that I think a much stronger feeling about than Labour do is that we want to be in power. We don't like being in opposition. And actually, quite a lot of Labour people that are dyed-in-the-wool Labour prefer to have the kind of moral authority of opposition than the grubby compromise of power.
I've heard you say this before, Ruth, on this podcast, and I'm so with you because I wanted power. I am so glad we're in power. I've never been one of those Labour members who just like being in opposition, but there are a lot of them. And I think that's a really important feature of the Labour Party. And it's one of the reasons that explains why we spend more time in opposition than you guys.
Now, Ruth, is there 4 candidates that are going to go through to party conference for the beauty parade?
Yeah, and then 2 off the back of that is my understanding. Yeah.
So who do you think the 4 going in will be, and who do you think the 2 coming out will be?
Oh, that's a very good question.
I know I'm good at questions.
Yeah, I think despite the fact that he did such a power of work for us at the election in terms of being the minister for telly, I think Mel Stride might drop out relatively early and might not make it to there.
I think James Cleverly's a bit underpriced, actually. I do. I wonder whether it ends up as a James Cleverly generate runoff, Ruth.
I can see that. I can see that.
And the reason I say that, and I might be completely wrong, but is someone is going to be the right candidate, yeah? And actually Cleverly did a really good job in the general election campaign of being the guy that went out and got punched up every day and just kept doing it, right?
He's also a natural loyalist. Like, he understands team. And I think partly his military background is that he really gets that you kind of don't leave a man behind, and that you have to sometimes do the grunt work. And actually, I think there might be a difficulty if one or 2 of the other candidates do get it, of them understanding how unglamorous opposition work is. And there's a couple that have a reputation for being quite grand and, not being nice to, security guards and people that drive the cars. I'm not, that you're not going to pull me on that one. That might
I think I know who they are.
Might not like the idea that they have to roll up their sleeves and they don't have the resource that a government minister does or anything like it and actually slog this out. But what has surprised me, given that, well, let's be honest here, it's not like we've not had quite a lot of leadership contests recently within the Tory party, is how slow off the mark people have been to commit. You're right, it is noteworthy that I've come out for James because very few people have. And I don't know whether that's just people are exhausted after the election and they went on holiday with their families and they're going to come back and start paying attention this week and the following weeks. But it's been a very slow burn so far. Very slow burn.
So I think there'll be a tussle between sort of generic Kemi Badenoch and Priti Patel. And then you've got kind of Tom Tugendhat and maybe it is that James cleverly scoops up a bit more of the kind of centrist / One Nation more wing of the party. I know it's going to be absolutely fascinating.
I mean, I genuinely think it's an open race.
There's a story breaking actually at the moment, Ruth. This is from Harry Cole of The Sun, very plugged into the Conservatives, which is saying that senior Tories are plotting to bring forward the leadership result to allow their new boss to respond to the budget on October the 30th. That's a good idea, is it?
I personally, if anybody spent a bit longer thinking about it, might not want one of your first jobs to be responding to the budget because it's one of the hardest things you can do.
It's a horrible job.
It's a horrible job because you don't see it in advance.
Yeah.
And you've got some scripted lines, so you can maybe make a couple of good lines on the TV news at 6. But if people are actually watching it, and that's one of the events that people sit down and watch because it's such a material impact, and they'll watch this one because it's the first one that a new government has done and it sets the tone and the tenor for the rest of this term. I would urge my colleagues to think about whether they want somebody who's very numerate and Treasury literate like Rishi Sunak to respond. So I think that would be a very tough opening gig to give any new leader.
I think Ruth's got a point. Like I have been, when I was shadow leader of the House, I was like 3 down from Keir when he had to respond. And it's a very nerve-wracking job. You are being constantly handed notes by people who are being texted by others.
I can tell you, when I am doing a budget on the television live, the only thing I ask for, the thing I need, is the scorecard. And the scorecard is the actual costings of all the policies. And they will, with flourish, say all this sort of stuff. And you don't actually understand what it means until you see the scorecard and you work out where the tax is coming from and the spend is coming from. And you cannot interpret a budget until you have read a scorecard.
You can't. And you can't do it when people are shouting in the chamber and you're hearing it for the first time and you can't write down the numbers and all the rest of it. It's an impossible job to give a new leader.
It's quite hard to do budgets live on television, let alone in the Commons when you haven't seen the scorecard.
Tough gig.
Whoa, tough gig, but someone's got to do it. That's all we've got time for, ladies. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself.
That's great, isn't it?
And so interesting.
It's worth coming off
you.
holiday to hang out with you two. But look, we've got to go. Remember, you can email me at any time, electoraldysfunction@sky.uk, or send a voice note to the burner phone 07934 200 444. Now, Sharon did just that. She WhatsApped us to say, whoop, whoop. And she's got one of my favourite emojis, which is the 2 hands up.
Love that.
I love that emoji. I use it a lot. Salford tickets bought and reminder set to ensure perfect sleek bob for the show.
Oh, so she's booked into the old hairdressers to get herself ready.
I love that.
In tribute to your beautiful sleek
so
bob.
you've bought tickets and you're going to come with a bob.
A Beth-alike.
A Beth bob.
I like Sharon.
So that's a nice reminder from Sharon that we are coming to Salford. You don't have to have a bob, by the way. You can just come with your other haircuts. All haircuts are welcome. We are going to Salford, Liverpool, London and Glasgow in September. It's me, Ruth and special guests. You can get tickets from the link in the show notes, and I'll tweet it out too from my X account. That's at Beth Rigby. We have sold out London, but you can still get tickets for everywhere else. So go, go, go. Goodbye. And also, Thangam, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Being
This
our
has been
very
great.
special guest.
This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.